So today we're going to be talking about our first commitment, which is justice and equality. This is part of our 12th accountability commitment, and it's the core work of Accountable Now. This is going to be a part of a webinar series that we're going to cover each of the 12 accountability commitments each month. And the objective is just to get different ideas, get inspired on how to improve our accountability practices, and also reflect a bit on certain issues surrounding these commitments. In this webinar, we'll be talking about justice and equality, and also we will learn a bit of what does it entail, some examples, and from there we're gonna see the experience of Matt in All Out and how they are delivering campaigns safely to promote LGBT+ rights. As well as we're gonna open after discussions and questions and answers. Again, please, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, add it to the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. As well as we'll have a section where we have an evaluation. We will really like to hear your thoughts and feedback on the webinar. So we'll share with you a bit on what we consider it's justice and equality. So as our first commitment, when we talk about justice and equality, our commitment is to address injustice, exclusion, inequality, poverty, and violence to create healthy societies for all. This is within our first commitment. And this commitment is at the core. This commitment, it reflects different ways this commitment reflects what we consider as a good practice for accountability, and So what does it mean for us? Everyone should enjoy the same rights and freedoms to make the choices about their lives, regardless of their nationality, location, gender, ethnicity, among others. Or as our co-presenters at All Out phrase it, as regardless of who the people are and who they love. Justice and equality, as we understand it, allows people to participate in the decisions that affect their lives and can hold governments, CSOs, and other actors into account. As civic actors seeking to change our reality, our societies, to improve people's lives, and in collaboration with them, we must actively work with them to ensure that they are treated justly and equally. This commitment also, it's a bit, it can be a bit abstract. So let's bring it down a bit to the ground. And what do you mean what does it entail to actively work for justice and equality? There are many examples we can talk about. So we can conduct context or conflict analysis with our stakeholders in a participatory and systemic manner. We can discuss with them and undertake necessary changes together with our stakeholders. So, for example, CVM, as part of their work, they include people with disabilities in every stage of the project cycle management, and also in the advisory work. Another way we can promote justice and equality is we can lead by example. We can seek inclusivity and equality in our work, in our recruiting practices, in our partnerships, in our programming. So, for example, another example from our members is Restless. They work mostly in their work with young people and promoting young people's rights. They aim to have 51% of the global staff to be under the age of 28. Another way we can promote justice and equality is we can regularly assess the risk that our stakeholders, including our staff and our partners, face with regards to discrimination, violence, or neglect. Based on this, we can develop strategies to prevent or mitigate them. For example, CSO Children's Villages has empowered the staff to ensure the safety of children through their protective behavior programs in Asia, Western and Central Africa. All of these examples you can also find in the reports and our good practice libraries. So you can have a better sense of what does these commitments, a little bit more examples of what these commitments entail. Also, one way we can think about is how can we trigger conversations within our organizations? And one question that we must make ourselves is what are the impacts of our work in different groups of stakeholders? How our presence and our work affect the people, not only that we work for and with, how does it affect our partners, our local and international staff, also local and national governments, thinking in a broader concept of stakeholders, as well as how do we mitigate unintended negative risk, and what kind of strategies can we prevent or can we use to prevent or mitigate any effect that our work might have on all these stakeholders. We might reflect and act acknowledging that when we're working for equality and justice, we're affecting power structures, and with the change comes uncertainty and risk. We have the responsibility to create positive changes, but also the responsibility to prevent and mitigate any further harm to our stakeholders. So now we can hear a bit more on how All Out, Matt can present a bit on what their experience has been to promote justice and equality for LGBT people, but also how they prevent and mitigate any further harm to their local partners and constituents. Matt, if you can share with us your experience.
Thank you very much, Erica. And I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, while that's loading, just to say it's great to be with you all. I'm Matt Beard, I'm the Executive Director at All Out. I noticed, Erica, in your introduction that you also mentioned Restless as a member of Accountable Now, and I should also mention that I'm also a trustee at Restless. I've been on that board just for the last 6 months. Just to give you a very quick overview of All Out as an organization before I start, Erica already mentioned our mission statement. It is really to work towards a world in which nobody has to sacrifice their family, their freedom, their safety, or their dignity because of who they are or who they love. We're just a small team with just 12 people distributed around the world, and we use digital technology to harness and channel people power. We do 3 big things with that. The first thing we do is global campaigning, and that's what I'm going to be talking about mostly today in terms of that risk mitigation issue. The second thing we do is crowdfunding from our global membership in order to fund pieces of service delivery, activism, or economic empowerment projects amongst our global partnership network. And then the third thing we do is digital training. We believe, and well, we know that there is an explosion of digital connectivity around the world at the moment, particularly in Africa. And we want to make sure that young LGBT activists have the skills and capacities and capabilities to use those digital technologies effectively and safely to tell their stories and to harness the narrative and to make sure that that space is not occupied by our opposition who want to spread hatred and violence. So I'm going to look at the question that's posed in this webinar through 2 perspectives. Firstly, I'm going to talk about our partner groups. So All Out works very much on the basis of partnership. We don't ever campaign in a local context, whether that be a national, regional, or local context, but we always work with a partner who is really on the front line and working at the grassroots. And then secondly, I'm going to talk a little bit about our global supporter base. We're an organization that functions very much on the basis of people power. Without people, without the idea of lots of small voices coming together to make a very loud noise, All Out wouldn't have a theory of change. So it's people power that creates the change that we want to see in the world. We're not an organization that spends time in the corridors of power. We don't do high-level advocacy. We're not an organization of lawyers. We don't do strategic litigation around the decriminalization of homosexuality. And we're not a Human Rights Watch or an Amnesty doing kind of high-level expert documentation of human rights violations. What we do is use the power of the online street, the hundreds of thousands of supporters we have around the world, to raise the volume when LGBT plus people are being hurt or threatened or violated. So I'll kick off by talking about our partner work, and the image that you can hopefully see on your screens I'm going to talk about in a moment. This is an image from the first ever Swaziland Pride that took place last year in the Mbani. But let me just talk more generally first about our partner work and our partner accountability. I would argue, and I think I'm, as the executive director of the organization, proud of the fact that partner accountability is at the very heart of all of our campaigning work. It just has to be. Because even though some all-out staff are or have been in hostile environments for LGBT plus people, it's our partners who are really on the front line. It's them who are risking their jobs, their family life, and frankly, sometimes even their lives, to stand up for their community and to demand their rights. And their vulnerability in those contexts has to be at the forefront of their mind, of our minds, when we're initiating and delivering campaigns. So there are two ways that an all-out campaign can be brought to life. Either we initiate or a partner group initiates. When we initiate, we see something that is happening around the world through our networks, through the media, and we then approach one of our partners in that particular country or region, and we just say to them, hey, this thing is happening. Do you think it could benefit from the kind of work that All Out does, from this kind of international pressure, from this international volume raising? Is this something that could be helpful at this point? If they say no, we drop it. We would never intervene in any kind of situation where the partner group in that country believes that that kind of pressure is not helpful. If they say yes, then we work with them to co-create the campaign together, always putting them in the driving seat. But to be honest, what happens more than often now, after All Out has been in existence for 8 years, and we're well known around the global international LGBT movement, is that partner groups from around the world come to us when they have a particular issue that they want to campaign on or raise money for or bring into the public's attention. They will come to us with a proposition, and again, we will co-create a campaign with us. Either way, whether we initiate or they initiate, the partners are in the driving seat. They decide on the target of the campaign, how aggressively to state our demands, how to communicate to the public. And wherever possible within the realms of safety concerns, it is one of our partners who is the face and the voice of the campaign, who speaks directly to our supporter base around the world. So let me just briefly, to bring it to life, just briefly tell you the story of Swaziland Pride. For those who don't know, Swaziland is a small landlocked country in southern Africa. It is the last absolute monarchy in Africa. It is also a place where same-sex love is illegal. And our partners there, a fantastic organization called Rock of Hope, came to us at some point in 2017 and said to us, will you support with us through your crowdfunding, through your campaigning, the first ever Pride in Swaziland? We thought it was an incredibly audacious idea, and we were very excited by it, and we decided to work with them on this. Right from the beginning, our partners at the Rock of Hope had some really clear ideas about how they wanted to pull this off. I need to remind people who are listening in, who perhaps don't know much about the LGBT movement in Africa, that outside South Africa, there has not really been a fully successful African Pride. And so this was an incredibly ambitious idea, that in this small landlocked country that's an absolute monarchy where it's illegal to be gay, we were going to actually march on the streets in Pride. And so our partners in Swaziland were put in the driving seat. And what they said to us is, we need to deliver this in a really smart way, in a way that presents it as a family festival, rather than something that is going to challenge the cultural and religious norms of the country. Now, that, as someone who grew up as a gay man in London, I would kind of naturally want to be a bit more daring than that, but we very much kind of put them in the driving seat, and that's what was delivered. It still was a tough moment for all of us. We had threats of firebomb attacks against participants, of machete attacks. We had the mobilization of an organization called Citizen Go, which some of you may have heard about, which is a digital organization that campaigns against sexual and reproductive rights and LGBT rights. And they managed to mobilize within the country, whipped up the media. They actually caused the police to ban the Pride Parade, even though they had previously authorized it. And it was only after some very last-minute negotiations with the police commissioner that we were able to reauthorize the Pride Parade. And then what happened on the day is that we took a back seat. Our supporters had funded this, but we enabled them to kind of lead this. And 300 people gathered on a sports field in the city center. And without wanting to get into too much of the emotion of the day, I have to tell you that as those 300 people left the sports field and came together for the first time ever on the streets of their own city, singing beautiful African freedom songs in wonderful harmony, it was an incredibly moving moment, and you can kind of see the excitement on the faces of the people in this GIF. And the whole thing went off without violence and was successful. A less happy story is the story of Pride Uganda. Again, All Out has supported Pride Uganda for the last 3 years, but is an event that has not happened because there is a particular government minister there, someone who has the Orwellian title of the Minister for Ethics and Integrity. His name is Simon Lokodo. And each year he has used intimidation, brutality, and violence to prevent LGBT plus Ugandans from exercising their absolutely constitutional guaranteed right to freedom of peaceful association and assembly. I'll tell you the story of 2016, just to give an example of accountability and action here. In 2016, we ran a couple of Pride events in Kampala that were successful. At the beginning of the week, there was a diplomatic reception in which we had ambassadors from the US, from Germany, from Holland, from the UK. Everything seemed to be going well. And then on the third evening of that series of events, an evening function for the trans community was raided by the police very unexpectedly. We had permission in place for this event. I was at the event, and the police came in and they beat people up very badly and very brutally. Many people were arrested. They were further beaten and sexually assaulted in the police cells that night. And the next morning, we had a meeting of the Pride Organizing Committee to decide on next steps. And I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of the resilience of this community by telling you that some people turned up at that 8:30 a.m. meeting, and they came directly from the police cells, and they were still bleeding, literally. But as we were meeting, a live television press conference was being held by Simon Lokodo, the Minister for Ethics and Integrity. And in that press conference, he was announcing that if the main Pride Parade went ahead, that we had planned for the following Saturday, he would organize vigilante mobs from the countryside with machetes and clubs to attack peaceful Pride protesters. Now, All Out had raised the money from our supporter base. People had given an average of just 10 or 15 euros to create enough money to run this event. But it was very much statement of the obvious, really, passed to the organizers of this event to decide whether or not that risk should be taken and whether the Pride Parade should go ahead. There was enormous pressure from the community to go ahead anyway. One young woman said to me that evening, I've nothing to fear. I have nothing to lose. I'm willing to risk my life to do this. And so there was a real dilemma for the Pride Organizing Committee. Pressure from the community to go ahead, an incredible fear that this would turn into a bloodbath. And they decided eventually not to go ahead. And we very much respected that decision. We had to go back to our financial supporters, our donors, and say, we were not able to run the event that you funded. And we told them why, and we told them about the accountability that we have to our partners in Uganda. And with very few exceptions, the responses from our donors were incredibly positive and incredibly supportive, even though the money that they had donated was essentially wasted because all of the money had already been spent on catering and security and logistics. We managed to bring together about 40 people who had volunteered for Pride in a secret location. It was actually in a Chinese restaurant that evening, dodging the police in order to get there, asking people to give up their phones at the door so that nobody could geotag the location. And I just want to give you a little bit of an insight. I'm hoping the video will work. If it doesn't, I can send it later. Just a 30-second video of at least 40 people in Kampala managing to defy Simon Lokodo on that Saturday evening and come together in this party. Okay, I'm now going to go on in the second section of this just to talk a little bit about our supporter base, because we're currently in a process of change around this. I think it would be fair to say that All Out started life as what I would call, in inverted commas, an old power organization. It was based on the idea that a small team of highly professionalized campaigners worked with our partners to select the campaigns, to decide on targets, to brainstorm tactics, and then to deliver campaigns. Supporters, the hundreds of thousands of people out there who supported these campaigns, they were the fuel that powered that professional campaigning engine with their signatures or actions, but they were not really part of the car. They were not part of the car that was driving. And so we're currently in a kind of business model change process, if you like, because we want to make our frontline partner groups and our individual supporters part of the car. And we're undertaking a radical shift, and we're halfway through this at the moment, to a distributed campaigning and fundraising model. We want to dramatically decrease the number of professional campaigns that we deliver ourselves, and we want to hand over power. We want to hand over the tools, the channels, and the audience for others to do this. Critically, and this is how it links back to the first part of my presentation about our partners, we believe that we still have to moderate. We have a safety-first approach, and we can't allow anything to be published in our name that threatens the security of LGBT+ communities. So our move towards a community-based campaigning or a distributed campaigning model won't be a free-for-all. It won't be change.org, for those of you who know that website. It will be still moderated. But what we really believe needs to happen is that accountability needs to not just be to our partner groups, but also to the hundreds of thousands of people who support us. And we want to give them the opportunity to participate in that same way. Just one small example. I'm talking to you today from Sao Paulo in Brazil, where I'm spending around 4 months leading our project here to be part of the resistance to the new administration of Jair Bolsonaro, who became president on January 1st. I'm sure most of you are aware, but Bolsonaro is as well as many other things, he's a violent homophobe, stating in the past that he would rather have a dead son than a gay son. Right now, we're running a campaign around a case that's heard literally as we speak, actually, in Brasilia by the Brazilian Supreme Court, that was put in place way before the presidential election, and if passed by a majority of Supreme Court justices, would make LGBT phobia, so verbal and physical abuse against LGBT plus people, a criminal offense. It doesn't enjoy the same protection in Brazil at the moment as, for example, racist-based hate crime does. So we kind of triggered or energized our supporter base in Brazil around this. We've had 700,000 people sign the petition to the Supreme Court. But what we also wanted to do is to bring to life that fear and sense of vulnerability that LGBT plus people in this country face every day. And we asked our supporters around the country to send us testimonies that we could also present to the Supreme Court justices that bring to human kind of life that sense of what it is to be LGBT in this country. 800 people sent in the most heartbreaking, damning testimony of the state of transphobia and homophobia in this country. On this slide, you can see just 4 of them, just extracts from 4. But we've presented that testimony to the Supreme Court justice. And for me, it's an example of bringing that accountability to the entire community, that supporter base, and bringing their voices into that courtroom that is literally as we speak, being heard today. And we may even have a decision by the end of the day today. The final thing I just wanted to raise that could be interesting for a future discussion or in the Q&A after this, but I don't have time to go into in any detail. I'm aware that the time is pressing, is around our social media presence. So I just wanted to just highlight this. So this is a constant dilemma we have around that kind of dividing line between free speech on the one hand and enabling a safe space for members of our community to be within our social media presence on the other. For most of our campaigns, we receive a fair amount of hate speech on our social media pages. That ranges from disagreements about our position on pro-LGBT legislation, which we believe absolutely has a place there, right through to death threats. And there is a point somewhere on that continuum where we have to make a decision about what has gone too far. And I'm sure in your organizations there are similar dilemmas, but it's something that we face every day, and it requires a lot of our time and a lot of moderation. And it takes its toll on our staff, who are basically daily confronted with the most poisonous and hateful comments on our social media platforms. I'm finishing here, but I was asked by Erica to just pose 2 questions which could be the basis of some of the discussion that will now take place. So the questions I've come up with are on the screen. When we work with activist groups who are vulnerable to attack and violence, where do our responsibilities as Northern CSOs start and end? And how do we define the line online between free speech and protecting the digital safety of our supporters and audiences?